Hi, welcome back to my channel, Modister Sews. I'm Hannah. Today starts part 2 of sewing this Myosotis dress from Doe Patterns. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss any of the sew along. Today we're going to go over sewing on the collar and attaching the buttons. Let's get started. To start our collar, we need to mark our starting point for our stitch line and the end point. So what I did is I measured in 5/8 of an inch here, and I measured up 5/8 of an inch. You can use your tape measure for that, or you can use your seam gauge, and then you would just simply mark it with whatever marking tool you want to use. Next, we're just going to lay these right sides together. We're going to pin them in place, and then we will stitch around, starting and stopping at these dots. We'll make sure we back stitch when we do that as well. So go ahead and pin it in place. Okay, now we can take it to our sewing machine. Okay, so we'll be starting at this point and we'll back stitch at the beginning and all the way at the end. Remember to sew a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so our stitching should look like that. I'll show you from this side. See how I stitched around. So we're stopped and left 5/8 of an inch at the bottom. Next, we need to clip our corners on our collar. So any rounded part, we're going to clip into it. You're going to clip to the thread, but not through the thread. And you're just going to create notches, and this is going to help us to flip our collar pieces in the next step. So you're going to just clip in like that on both sides. Be careful not to go all the way down on this side, as you do need your seam allowance to flip and turn this. Let's press our collar into place now. I did clip out those notches because it's going to help us when we flip this over, so it'll create more room. But basically we're just going to flip it inside out, well, right sides out, and then we'll press it into place. So take your time doing this. I like to just kind of roll the seam forward, and I'm going to use my pressing cloth to get this done. And then I'm just, again, I'm rolling that forward so that the seam is at the very top of the collar and there's no weird creases forming. And really rounding out those corners so I can get them nice and round and flat. So go ahead and press out your collar like this. When we put the collar in, it's important that we only pin the uninterfaced portion of the collar to the bodice. And it's going to be laid so that this right side is against the wrong side of the bodice. The other factor we need to take into consideration is the placement of the collar. Now you can see here, there's the end of that stitching line right here, and we have this leftover seam allowance. We need to make sure that this stitching line completely right here lines up exactly with the facing edge. So we're going to take this portion of the uninterfaced collar, and I'll show you what I mean. We're going to line this up so that that stitching line is right at the edge here. And we're going to pin in place. So you're keeping your seam allowance up here as well, but you want that stitching line to come right to the edge of your facing. And do this to both sides first. I like to do that. And then ease in the rest of my collar. Lining this up like this is going to ensure that everything matches up perfectly when you're sewing in your collar and then flipping it to be right side out. Okay, so when I ease it in, I just find the center of, I've already found the center of the collar, I notched it, and I did the same thing on the back, and then I just matched those up. And now I just ease in on both sides. Now that I have it pinned into place, I'm going to take it to the machine and I'll sew it 5/8 inch all the way across while easing all this in. And if you need to add more pins, go ahead and do it. As many pins as you need to get it to go in smoothly. Let's take it to the machine. Before we begin sewing in our collar, we need to really make sure this is lined up correctly. So our stitching line is here and we need it to line up exactly at the edge of our facing. You will have some overhang up here of your what we're gonna sew. That's okay, don't worry about that. Do not cut it off. What we're gonna do is we're gonna place this under the presser foot and we want our needle to drop as closely to this stitching line as possible. You want it to sit on this side, not this side, because if you put it on this side, it's gonna sew down the top part of your collar and then it will be harder to flip over. So I'm trying to get the best angle to show you, but this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna place my collar under here, making sure that I can line everything up. I got everything out of the way. I'm lowering my presser foot and then I'm going to drop my needle. And at this point, I look pretty good from where I can see, and I'm gonna start stitching, but I'm gonna make sure I'm keeping all my fabric perpendicular to that needle. So you don't want any gathers or tucks. You need to make sure all of this extra fabric here and in your collar are laying as straight and as flat as possible as you approach the presser foot. Remember to back stitch. Now I have my collar all sewn in, we need to press it. I already did go ahead and press my collar, but I'll show you what I did. I took this bottom portion of the seam allowance and I pressed it up toward the inside of the collar. And then on this top portion of the collar that has been interfaced, I fold this over at 5/8 inch seam allowance and press into place. Now that we have that done, we can fold the entire collar over on itself and start pinning it into place. When you get to the corners, they become quite bulky, so just go slow and layer by layer, fold in your seam allowances and tuck them up into the corners, like so. And then just go across and start pinning it into place. Pinned into place, let's take it to the sewing machine and top stitch it into place. We're we're gonna top stitch on the right side of the garment, and I have set my stitch length to about a 3 for me. And I'm gonna start, I like to start in the back of the neckline, so that's where I'll start. And you wanna sew it about 1/16 inch away from that edge. You're right on the edge. And just sew all the way around the entire collar. Now that we have our collar top stitched in, we can go ahead and start marking our buttonholes. You're gonna need to get your pattern back out, the front bodice back out. And what I do is I mark the buttonholes on the back as well, and I just fold along there. Then I'm gonna place this on the right side of my bodice, lay it out flat. And I like my buttonholes to be in the center of my facing. So I'm gonna line this up with the bottom edge here, and I'm simply gonna make sure that this is where I want it in the center. Might have to tweak it a little bit to get it to line up. But basically that's all you do, and now we're just gonna mark it. And then we'll take it to the sewing machine and we'll insert our buttonholes. If you're not sure how to insert buttonholes, I do have a video tutorial on my YouTube channel here, and you can refer back to that, but you do need to check your manual of your sewing machine, because all sewing machines are different, so you want to make sure you're doing it the right way. Since I have all my buttonholes in place, I'm going to open them up real quick with my buttonhole chisel. Okay. Now we need to line up our front facings, and you're going to overlap the right side over to the left by like about 3/4 of an inch. So basically what I like to do is hide that top stitch there just slightly. We're going to do that, and then we're going to match up the bottom carefully and pin that into place, because we will be basting this portion down at the bottom here in place. But before we do that, I want to make sure everything is nice and straight. I'm gonna straighten up my facing, lay this on top, and then I'm gonna mark where I want my buttons to go. So I opened it up and I just like them right dead center of the buttonhole. And from that side, this is where I'll be placing my buttons. So we'll take it to the machine, I'll sew my buttons in, and I will baste across the edge here at the bottom. This concludes part 2 of the Myosotis dress sew along. We've installed our collar and it looks great. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss part 3, where we sew in our inset sleeves. Thanks for joining me. Bye.